objection, the chair is authorized to declare recess at any time. And before I deliver opening remarks, I wanted to note that obviously today's committee hearing is meeting virtually. Just a couple of reminders that members are well familiar with about the conduct of this hearing. First, members should keep their video feed on for as long as they're present in the hearing. Members are certainly responsible for their own microphones. Please also keep your microphone muted unless you are speaking. And finally, if members have documents that they wish to submit for the record, please email them to the committee clerk whose email address was circulated prior to the hearing. And so good morning to all of my colleagues, and thank you to our witnesses for joining us here today. I look forward to an excellent discussion that will signify the extent to which federal climate adaptation and resilience is a priority for the committee. The hearing on federal climate adaptation and resilience for the 21st century. I think we're all excited to be a part of this hearing, and I'm particularly proud to lead this hearing because this is an issue that resonates with anyone who cares about making the federal government work for the American people. On the Science Committee, we see all the time the incredible things that the federal government can do. We see NOAA develop forecasts and models that have revolutionized our understanding of the natural world and that will save lives when extreme weather threatens our communities. We see the Department of Energy invest in groundbreaking technologies that change the boundaries of what we think is possible. We see NASA push the limits of human knowledge beyond even our planet itself. I truly believe that all of us on both sides of the aisle are committed to supporting the missions of these agencies and ensuring that they can get the job done. Climate change is a threat to these agencies and our entire federal government that simply cannot be ignored. By now, we are all too familiar with the litany of climate risks that confront our society: rising sea levels and more frequent coastal floods, dangerous wildfires sparked by higher temperatures and longer, more intense droughts, intense precipitation that overwhelms flood protections, and many more. Federal agencies are a part of our society as well, and they must adapt along with the rest of us. As the owners of a vast and complex asset infrastructure, agencies like NOAA, DOE, and NASA are vulnerable to the full spectrum of climate impacts. The testimony of our witnesses today will make clear that NASA is facing challenges. Their launch facilities, which are essential to the agency's mission, are coastal and gravely threatened by sea level rise. DOE's national laboratories, a jewel of American scientific research, are grappling with the need to maintain safety protocols under more extreme weather conditions. NOAA's finely tuned instruments and platforms which generate data that underpin so much vital scientific work are increasingly operating in conditions beyond their designated operating parameters. Climate change is not an abstract phenomenon for these agencies and for their federal agencies across the executive branch. It is a concrete, tangible danger that could undermine core agency functions if not properly addressed. The answer, as we will discuss in this hearing, is to bolster climate adaptation and resilience processes throughout the federal government to ensure that facilities are protected, operations are insulated, and future investments are made wisely. Federal agencies must adapt to climate risk and strengthen the resilience to climate impacts. It's not going to be easy. Agencies need a detailed understanding of their own climate vulnerabilities. They will need to update their planning processes to account for these vulnerabilities. They will need to incorporate climate data into basic management functions, and they will need to teach their workforces how to interpret that data accurately. Finally, they will need the resources and the support to implement their adaptation and resilience strategies. It will be a large undertaking and it will take sustained effort over many years, but it is necessary. And I believe there will be bipartisan support for it. Protecting the capabilities of federal agencies like NOAA, DOE, and NASA is a shared goal for all of us. We should also realize that climate change does not only threaten federal science agencies, it also highlights how vital their work truly is. The scientific assets that must be protected from climate impacts are the very assets that will lead the way in strengthening adaptation and resilience. NOAA, NASA, and DOE produce climate data, create climate resilient technologies, and operate advanced scientific tools that will provide the foundation for climate adaptation and resilience across the federal government. They can lead the way, not only to protect themselves, but also to educate their fellow agencies about how to do the same. This is innovation in action. I am eager to hear more about how federal science agencies can enhance their interagency cooperation to the benefit of the entire government. Again, I want to thank our witnesses before testifying before the committee today. And as representatives of NOAA, DOE, NASA, and GAO, you are leaders in preparing the federal government for climate change and working to mitigate for climate change legislation that will be forthcoming. You're also confronting your own agency's efforts and for the government as a whole. You can help us to understand the true scale of this challenge, as well as the best ways for Congress to support adaptation and resilience strategies in the years to come. Thank you for your commitment to public service and for the important work you do. And now I will yield to Ranking Member Lucas for his opening statement.
Thank you, Chairwoman Stevens. As many of my neighbors in rural Oklahoma could tell you, droughts are getting longer, heat waves are getting hotter, and the task of anticipating and managing risks from the environment has gotten more challenging. Extreme weather events can take lives and destroy property if we don't prepare for them. I know that many of these trends are related to the changing climate, and their effect could continue to grow in the future. In addition to our work in reducing emissions and combating climate change, we must also adapt to what we're currently facing. We've long recognized environmental risk for individuals and communities, which is why we've tasked agencies like NASA, NOAA, and DOE to provide tools and services to help prepare for and recover from severe events. But as we continue to confront a changing environment across the nation, we must ensure that our federal infrastructure is also protected and prepared to adapt. We're in the midst of an unprecedented investment in our infrastructure, and this committee has been a driving force when it comes to increasing support for federal research infrastructure. Recognizing that a world-class science enterprise requires world-class facilities and equipment, we invested heavily in infrastructure in the DOE Science for the Future Act, the NSF for the Future Act, and the NIST for the Future Act. In addition to preserving the facilities and instruments the federal government has already spent billions to build or acquire, these bipartisan bills call for more construction and additional facilities, projects, and tools that will ensure the U.S. research enterprise remains on the cutting edge and attracts world-renowned talent. I expect that as part of this investment, agencies will ensure that they're considering a future where weather is more extreme and the risk for unique environmental events might be higher. Planning ahead is just as important as putting a shovel in the ground quickly. So let me issue a serious marker for the future. As a part of our support for increased investment in federal research infrastructure, I do not expect to have another hearing in 5 years where the same agencies before us today come and testify their facilities are suffering because of environmental changes. We have the ability to identify those risks now, and we should start to work to overcome them immediately, or at the very least, position ourselves to mitigate their most harmful effects in the future. That responsibility falls on each federal agency. This preparation also extends beyond existing facilities and to the many new clean energy projects and demonstrations being implemented as a result of the Infrastructure Investments and Jobs Act. There is an unprecedented amount of money being spent through this legislation, which makes oversight and careful planning more important than ever. As money for brick and mortar projects goes out the door, we need to be sure this money is spent carefully on projects built to last. Long-term operations should be a priority, and consideration of climate risk is a part of that. A lack of forward-looking planning would be just as wasteful as building an instrument that doesn't work. Additionally, we have an obligation to provide our citizens the most accurate information on climate and weather events so that they can make informed decisions for their own well-being and resiliency. Today's hearing offers an opportunity for each agency to inform us about the adaptation tools they offer taxpayers and how those tools are being adjusted for changes in future climate risk. Personally, I believe that is best done by maximizing our resources through partnerships with private sector and academic institutions. I look forward to hearing from NASA and NOAA on how they plan to identify and utilize new commercial data related to atmospheric and weather behaviors. I also look forward to hearing from DOE on how their new demonstrations and pilot projects are bringing in partners from institutions of higher education and industry to help commercialize these groundbreaking tools. All in all, I think today's hearing is a timely topic and one I'm sure we'll look back on as a productive precursor. I look forward to hearing each of our witnesses' testimony, and I thank you, Madam Chairman, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Well, it's in the record for all of time, productive precursor. So this is just a great start to today's hearing. And if there are other members who wish to submit additional opening statements, your statements will be added to the record at this point. I would also at this time like to introduce our witnesses. So our first witness is Dr. Richard Spinrad. Dr. Spinrad is the Undersecretary of Commerce for Oceans and Atmosphere, as well as the Administrator of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, otherwise known as NOAA. He is responsible for developing NOAA's portfolio of products and services to address the climate crisis, enhance environmental sustainability, and foster economic development. Dr. Spinrad previously served as NOAA's chief scientist and lead of NOAA's Office of Oceanic and Atmospheric Research during President Obama's administration. He also served as the U.S. permanent representative to the United Nations Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission from 2005 to 2009. Our next witness is Ms. Ingrid Kolb. Ms. Kolb is the Department of Energy's Chief Sustainability Officer and Director of the Office of Management. The Office of Management oversees sustainability, acquisition management, real property management, and personal property management for DOE. Ms. Kolb also served as Deputy Director when the Office of Management was first established in 2005. Prior to her time with DOE, Ms. Kolb worked as the Chief of Staff to the Chief Financial Officers of both DHS and OMB. Our third witness is Dr. Joel Carney. Dr. Carney is the Assistant Administrator for the Office of Strategic Infrastructure, or OSI, as well as NASA's Chief Sustainability Officer. OSI leads NASA's Environmental Management Division, Logistics Management Division, Facilities and Real Estate Division, and the Space Testing Management Office. As head of OSI, Dr. Carney leads NASA's posture on climate change and environmental sustainment. Previously, Dr. Carney was the Deputy Associate Administrator for Mission Support Operations for NASA's Mission Support Directorate, where he managed agency infrastructure risk and operational transformation. Following from Dr. Carney is Mr. Alfredo Gomez. Mr. Gomez is the Director in the Natural Resource and Environmental Team of the U.S. Government Accountability Office, otherwise known as GAO. He manages the team's work in environmental protection issues. His portfolio includes work in cleanup of hazardous substances, drinking and clean water issues, ecosystem restoration, pesticides, toxic chemicals, climate change, and EPA-wide management issues. Mr. Gomez has produced numerous reports and testimonies addressing a wide range of environmental, natural resource, agency management, and food safety issues. I don't know about all of you, but these bios get me very fired up for the testimonies to follow. So as our witnesses should know, you're each going to have 5 minutes for your spoken testimony. Your written testimony will be included in the record for the hearing. When all of you have completed your spoken testimony, we're going to begin with member questions, and each member is going to have 5 minutes to question this phenomenal panel. So with that, we will start with Dr. Spinrad for 5 minutes of oral testimony.
Chairwoman Stevens, Ranking Member Lucas, members of the committee, thank you for this opportunity to testify today. Since its inception in 1970, NOAA has been a world leader in climate science and services, providing actionable environmental information That is the basis of smart policy and decision-making in a changing world. NOAA plays a unique role in the climate arena because we work along the entire life cycle, from climate data collection to research and modeling to product development and dissemination and continuous assessment. And we are mandated to make our data operational, providing actionable information to both the public and private sectors that protects lives and livelihoods and fuels the economy. In addition to helping other agencies and communities prepare for climate impacts, NOAA is working to ensure that our own operations are resilient to the impacts of climate change. NOAA facilities, like all infrastructure across the nation, are exposed to the full range of weather and climate extremes, and in some cases, their aging condition increases their vulnerability. We are in the last phase of a strategic review of facility vulnerabilities to extreme weather and climate change, such as sea level rise. We're using NOAA science to inform our facilities decisions and have salient examples of ways we've managed our facilities projects to better withstand climate impacts. A recent example is the Ketchikan Home Port Recapitalization Project in Alaska. The floating pier, which will home port our fair weather survey vessel, will be designed to withstand rising sea levels due to climate change. The pier's reconstruction also entails a significantly reduced carbon footprint. Information is power, and we share our climate data publicly and directly with users through our many partnerships and boots on the ground activities across the country. We also regularly equip our interagency colleagues with climate data products and services that they need to make informed decisions to minimize exposure to extreme weather and climate impacts. And I'd be happy to go into some examples during the Q&A. These partnerships help us provide trusted and targeted climate information to users and give us feedback, so we're constantly improving our science and services to meet the evolving needs of our stakeholders. One of my top priorities as NOAA administrator is to enhance NOAA's role as the authoritative provider of climate products and services that can be applied to a diverse range of needs. It's my vision that by 2030, NOAA will work with its partners to build a climate-ready nation that gets information into the hands of decision makers, provides support for tribal, rural, and other underserved communities, and expands our resources for climate readiness, response, and resilience. This capability is reflected in the Department of Commerce Climate Action Plan, in which NOAA leads the effort to foster and enhance the resilience of vulnerable communities. At NOAA, we recognize that climate adaptation and resilience are also opportunities to create jobs, spur economic growth, and prevent avoidable damages to infrastructure. Since becoming administrator, I've personally engaged with new and non-traditional partners, including the insurance sector, the American Medical Association, realtors, and civil engineers, to let them know NOAA stands ready to assist with actionable information. I've heard both a willingness and an urgency to incorporate forward-looking, authoritative climate information into their decision-making and business practices, as climate change is a major risk to their bottom lines. As part of the Department of Commerce, we can also help grow the burgeoning economic sector of commercial climate services to enable robust public-private partnerships, much like the successful $10 billion private weather enterprise that we know today. This new climate services sector, estimated to grow to a staggering annual value of $100 billion, will be built upon NOAA's credible data, research, modeling, and services. NOAA is an integral part of the whole of government effort to tackle the climate crisis, boost resilience, and promote economic growth. In the next decade, our nation must transition to a carbon neutral economy if we're to stave off the worst impacts of climate change. At the same time, we must adapt to the impacts we cannot avoid. Achieving both will require making climate services accessible to all Americans to help them make informed decisions for their future. At NOAA, we are eager to work with communities and partners across the United States and to build a climate-ready nation. After all, if we prepare to fail, we are going to prepare to fail. Thank you.
Okay, with that, we'll hear from Ms. Kolb.
Good morning, Congresswoman Stevens, Ranking Member Lucas, and members of the committee. It is an honor to appear before you today to discuss the Department of Energy's approach to addressing the threat of climate change to our mission and the actions that we are taking to enhance climate adaptation and resilience. The mission of the Department of Energy is to ensure America's security and prosperity by addressing its energy, environmental, and nuclear challenges through transformative science and technology solutions. DOE understands its mission is being performed in an already changing climate. Our sites, many of which are located in or near several of your districts, are already experiencing the impacts of climate change on our operations. DOE is committed to taking action to adapt and to respond to these threats by increasing our resilience. In August of 2021, Secretary Granholm issued the department's Climate Adaptation and Resilience Plan, which supports the president's climate and sustainability goals for climate resilient infrastructure and operations. The plan addresses the extreme weather events that have impacted the department's operations already. So some examples include wildfire damage and the disruption to operations that have occurred at such sites as Los Alamos National Laboratory in New Mexico and the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory in California. Extreme precipitation and flooding that have impacted DOE sites such as the Pantex plant in Texas, our nation's only nuclear weapons assembly and disassembly facility. Coastal flooding that's impacted our coastal sites, including the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, which is in Texas and Louisiana. So the key strategies in our plan for addressing these impacts include the following. First, the department is assessing our climate vulnerabilities at each DOE site and will develop resilience plans by this September. We will leverage risk assessment planning tools and the latest climate science information through collaboration with our national laboratories, including Argonne National Laboratory, as well as other federal agencies, including NOAA. The department will also enhance climate resilience by adopting solutions such as natural or physical barriers to protect facilities and equipment vulnerable to flooding, reinforcing assets vulnerable to wind and ice damage, reducing wildfire potential, and providing backup power generation to address power outages. In addition to hardening our assets, the department is implementing resilience measures, such as increasing energy efficiency and reducing energy demand. To support the transition to climate-ready sites, DOE will leverage its extensive land resources to increase resilience using on-site clean energy generation, and where possible, using our buying power to work with other federal agencies to procure clean electricity to meet the administration's climate goals. To support commercialization and deployment of new and innovative clean energy technologies, DOE will use its sites as test beds to demonstrate innovative, sustainable solutions for adoption and deployment at DOE sites and subsequent deployment to the public and private sectors. All of these efforts will be coordinated with DOE's new office, the Office of Energy Justice and Policy and Analysis, to promote energy and environmental justice and ensure we deliver the benefits of climate investments and climate resilience to disadvantaged communities. In summary, the department will incorporate climate adaptation and resilience goals and actions in our planning and operations. We will also act with urgency to ensure the resilience of our sites. And finally, we will engage and share our best practices with other federal agencies and other stakeholders. So thank you for the opportunity to participate today, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Excellent. And with that, we'll go to Dr. Carney.
Thank you and good morning. Chairwoman Stevens, Ranking Member Lucas, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to appear today to discuss NASA's efforts to increase resilience while achieving its mission in the face of a changing climate. Through data collection, improving our predictive capabilities, reducing the impacts of air travel, and advanced infrastructure planning, climate is a central theme at NASA. These efforts will inform responses to global challenges with climate change now and into the future. Along with the organizations represented on this panel, NASA is one of the leading federal agencies assessing climate vulnerabilities. NASA's Earth science missions collect data on space, airborne, and ground-based platforms, which are used to better understand trends in climate and improve our predictive capabilities. NASA's aeronautics research missions focus on advanced aircraft technologies and operational approaches that can lead to climate change mitigation benefits for the global community, including greenhouse gas emission reductions through electric propulsion and other advanced systems. Both of these organizations are also integral pieces of our nation's effort to improve the control of wildfires and their cascading impacts. Whether we are improving the global understanding of climate and its impacts or planning for future missions, NASA is focused on climate. Central to NASA's interest in climate effects is the threat posed to its unique critical infrastructure portfolio. NASA's missions rely on the availability and resilience of its facilities and underlying infrastructure. Approximately 2/3 of NASA's assets are located within 16 feet of mean sea level along America's coasts. Sea level rise, extreme weather events, coastal and river flooding, heat waves, and other changes have damaged and are projected to damage our centers in the future. Since 2003, NASA expenditures for recovery, hardening, and stabilization against these risks are estimated at more than $1 billion. For example, NASA has spent over $200 million in the last 2 decades repairing damage at centers due to flooding alone. Shoreline restoration projects have been necessary to protect critical launch capabilities from beach erosion at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida and the Wallops Flight Facility in Virginia. In the last 5 years, serious hurricanes have damaged rocket motor assembly and testing infrastructure at the Michoud Assembly Facility in Louisiana and the Stennis Space Center in Mississippi. These events highlight the risks to past and future missions. Infrastructure investment remains an essential part of the equation to provide safe and efficient, sustainable facilities that can withstand the evolving climate-related challenges and continue to support the success of NASA's missions in the future. In 2010, NASA established the Climate Adaptation Science Investigators, known as CASSI, located at the Goddard Institute for Space Studies in New York City. The CASSI team has worked with national and international teams to develop models that can better track and predict future climate conditions. In 2020, we engaged with the U.S. Department of Energy's National Renewable Energy Laboratory to study climate resilience at our NASA centers. NASA plans to complete the initial resiliency studies for all centers by 2025. These studies will inform our strategic infrastructure planning processes, which will help us better align climate change adaptation and resilience efforts to projected mission requirements. NASA is both a consumer of climate science and a leading source of climate data and information. We contribute to the latest climate observations, research, models, and analyses, providing foundational and decisional knowledge in cooperation with many partners. NASA will continue its efforts to improve our capabilities in modeling and climate change and its impacts, and share that data with the scientific community and other government agencies. These data products can enable better scenario planning and longer range decision-making for federal agencies and managers in a range of U.S. sectors, including insurance, agriculture, water resource management, to name a few. In closing, NASA continues to drive advances in science, technology, aeronautics, and space exploration to enhance knowledge, education, innovation, economic vitality, and stewardship of the Earth. We are committed to using our advanced planning techniques afforded by these scientific advancements to protect its assets and capabilities from the growing challenges, climate extremes, and climate-related changes posed to our environment. I thank the committee for this opportunity to testify before you today and look forward to the Q&A period. Thank you.
Thank you. And with that, we're going to hear from Mr. Gomez.
Chairwoman Stevens, Ranking Member Lucas, and members of the committee, good morning. I'm pleased to be here today to discuss GAO's work on federal climate adaptation and resilience. The rising number of natural disasters and increasing reliance on federal assistance is a key source of federal climate-related fiscal exposure. This issue has been on our high-risk list since February 2013. Enhancing climate resilience to help limit the federal government's fiscal exposure to climate change could reduce the need for far more costly steps in the future. The administration has taken some actions to implement recent climate-related executive orders, including the development of agency climate adaptation and resilience plans, which we've heard about from some of the witnesses. These plans describe steps agencies can take to bolster adaptation and increase resilience to the impacts of climate change. We are monitoring the implementation of these efforts. Madam Chairwoman, you asked about best practices that agencies could adopt to identify climate vulnerabilities and incorporate climate risks into their ongoing planning and program implementation. My statement today will discuss the Disaster Resilience Framework, which GAO issued in October 2019, and several reports on climate resilience. Congress and federal agencies can improve federal climate resilience planning and implementation by pursuing opportunities related to three guiding principles of the Disaster Resilience Framework: information, integration, and incentives. For the first guiding principle of information, Congress and federal agencies can improve federal climate resilience by helping decision makers access information that is authoritative and understandable to identify climate risks and the impact of risk reduction strategies. Our past work shows how improvements are necessary across the entire federal government and within specific programs. For example, the federal government needs a government-wide approach for providing federal, state, local, and private sector decision makers with the best available climate-related information and assistance with translating climate-related data into accessible information. For the second guiding principle of integration, Congress and federal agencies can improve climate resilience planning and implementation by helping decision makers integrate analysis and planning into their actions. We have previously recommended many ways to reduce federal fiscal exposure by better coordinating and directing federal climate resilience efforts towards common goals and developing a strategic approach for targeting federal resources. Currently, the federal government makes ad hoc investments and does not have a strategy for prioritizing projects that could have the most impact. For example, in June 2019, we recommended that the military departments update criteria for installation master planning to incorporate climate risk, and that DOE issue guidance on incorporating climate projections into installation master planning and facilities project designs. For the third guiding principle of incentives, Congress and federal agencies can improve federal climate resilience by making long-term risk reduction investments more viable and attractive among competing priorities. Federal incentives could also encourage risk reduction investments in state and local infrastructure projects. In a GAO report from last year, we provided several options to enhance the climate resilience of federally funded roads. Specifically, we identified and analyzed several policy options, such as expanded federal grants or additional funding requirements to incentivize states and localities to enhance the climate resilience of federally funded roads and reduce federal fiscal exposure. In summary, investments in adaptation and disaster resilience are a promising avenue to address federal fiscal exposure because such investments offer the opportunity to reduce the overall impact of disasters. We're also monitoring ongoing efforts to improve the integration of federal climate resilience activities, and we will report on these activities as part of next year's high-risk list report. Madam Chairwoman, Ranking Member Lucas, and members of the committee, this completes my prepared statement. I'd be pleased to respond to questions.
Great. Okay, at this point, we're going to begin our first round of questions, and the chair is going to recognize herself for 5 minutes. So it's obvious and clear that, you know, the big picture of what the risks are and how they're threatening the agency's ability to achieve the various missions is documented. You know, Kolb talked about the fires, we're getting a sense of the cost from NASA. And thank you, Mr. Gomez, for talking about the incentives. I think the question, though, is around, as you all are at the agency level are working on your individual agencies' resiliency strategies or sustainability strategies, how, if at all, are you coordinating through the federal government? Is there an interagency clearinghouse, or is this really taking place in isolated fashion? And Ms. Kolb, I'd certainly like to start with you, given your extensive background. I'm really quite fascinated that you spent time at DHS and now have this great post at DOE, because we could sort of start to see the national security components that Mr. Gomez talked about, and he mentioned the military's involvement. But have you had interagency discussions at this point?
Yes, absolutely. As a matter of fact, the Council on Environmental Quality has a Chief Sustainability Officers Council. We meet regularly. It's chaired by the government's Chief Sustainability Officer, and we talk about these very issues, how we're going to handle adaptation and resilience and sustainability as a government. And I really like the approach that CEQ is taking. You heard some of my colleagues talk about a whole of government approach. And so there is quite a bit of coordination, not just at our level, but as levels as you go through the government. So, for example, on the climate adaptation and resilience plans that we were all required to prepare, those plans were developed by each agency, and then they were reviewed by panels with representatives from various agencies. So that gave all the agencies an opportunity to see what the others were doing so that they could then incorporate best practices into those. So it's been a very collaborative process, and I give CEQ high marks for the way that they have designed it.
Yeah, that's great. And Dr. Spinrad, I know with NOAA, we've oftentimes just looked to you for so much guidance on climate change and how to deal with it. But obviously your testimony and talking about how you're dealing with this as an agency, I was just wondering if you could share a little bit more about just the risks that your agency is facing as it pertains to, the need for resilience.
Yeah, thank you, Chairwoman. The agency, NOAA has 620 facilities, buildings that we occupy around the country. And by virtue of our mission responsibilities, many of those are exposed to the threats of climate change. So what we have undertaken over the last couple of years is a rigorous regional footprint analysis for each of those facilities. It turns out that more than a third of them are over 65 years old. So not only are they subject to the climate impacts, but just the inherent vulnerabilities of being aging buildings as well. We're finishing up those regional footprint studies. We've got 2 more to do in the mountain states and the Midwest over this summer. And subsequent to those, what we're doing is a business case analysis of where investment should be prioritized so we can optimize our capability to perform our mission in recognition of the impacts of climate change. So I mentioned, for example, an example of what we're doing with our port facility in Ketchikan, Alaska. We recently moved our Aircraft Operations Center, where we fly our hurricane hunters, from MacDill Air Force Base to Lakeland. In so doing, we constructed the facility taking advantage of our understanding of what's going to happen to hurricane intensity in that part of the country. So through these analyses, through business case analysis, we're able to asset by asset make a determination of where we can apply resources most effectively.
Yeah, and Dr. Carney, you talked about the costs, and obviously threw out a huge figure with $1 billion, but obviously costs come down just hearing Dr. Spinrad, right? The human capital cost, the time that it takes, the orientation. So just with the remaining time, I mean, best practices, ways in which you've found success given your budget.
Right, it's a tough obstacle, and I think I would describe ours as a methodical approach that balances a lot of different risks to our infrastructure. Dr. Spinrad mentioned the age of facilities. I'm sure DOE has the same issues, right? And so we have that natural vulnerability there, as well as As I mentioned, 2/3 of our facilities are at or near the coastlines that are vulnerable to flooding and some of the other coastal storms. So we really balance all that in terms of putting together a master plan that brings in all the aspects of cost and condition and mission criticality in addition to our climate risks.
Fabulous. Well, thanks. I'm going to yield back the time I don't have anymore, but to myself. And as the chair now recognize Ranking Member Mr. Lucas for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Administrator Spinrad, it's good to see you again. And I'm sure you won't be shocked that my question today relates to a question I asked you in the FY22 budget hearing we had back in September on commercial weather data program. Since we wrote the Weather Act of 2017, there have been a lot of developments in the weather data world, including new types of commercial products and services. As we face a future with many different environmental challenges, how does NOAA plan to evaluate and update the commercial weather data program?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Ranking Member Lucas. And yes, I'm glad we're following up on that because we've actually been able to undertake a number of additional initiatives. I'm trying to lean forward as hard as we can because we recognize it's a changing world. The world we knew 20 years ago where the government owned all of the assets and capabilities is changing fundamentally. So just a few months ago, I signed the agreement to continue a pilot project to access privately provided weather data as a demonstration of how we can do the quality control on it, incorporate it into our models, and improve our forecasts. And in fact, as a result of that effort, we're getting something like 3,000 profiles a day of humidity in the atmosphere. I firmly believe that using the pilot, such as the one I just described, and working closely with the private sector, we can be much more aggressive about the incorporation of private commercial data into our weather products. My concern, of course, is balancing that to make sure we have a sustainable capability that if the private sector, for whatever reason, chooses not to provide those data and information down the line, that we have ways of accommodating that we have a robust infrastructure, if you will, for incorporating commercial data into our public products and services.
Are there any new authorities you think that NOAA needs in the future for the success of the program? Is there anything else we need to do to enhance?
Yeah, I think I'd basically say, give me a buy on that until we see how this works with the current pilot projects. I think the answer to your question may very well be, yes, there are some things that we need to improve on, but it is a bit early in the game right now to unequivocally say we need one of these and two of those in terms of authorities. I think we can come back to you after we've been able to demonstrate this project.
And I'm sure we'll discuss it.
Very good. Thank you.
Ms. Kolb, I want to shift my focus to you and DOE workforce. In January of this year, the department announced the launch of the Clean Energy Corps. Part of this announcement was that DOE plans to recruit an additional 1,000 employees. And I don't mean this in a combative way, but isn't solutions to climate change already baked into DOE's mission and everything you already do? And while you're thinking about that, what exactly is this new Corps going to do that is unique?
So in addition to the new team that we're going to be bringing on, and it's going to be about 1,000 new people, the reason we need these people is because we also received $62 billion in funding from the Congress in order to fund a number of very important initiatives. And so we need sufficient staff to make sure that that funding is spent properly and appropriately. That's one of the points that was made early on in this hearing, and that is extremely important to us. So the funding, there will be competitions that are held, and we need experts who can analyze the applications that come in for this various funding. And for the projects to make sure that we are funding projects that are worthwhile and are really going to make a difference in addressing climate change.
As hard as resources are, I just worry that trying to hire 1,000 new employees, and I worry maybe just for the sake of hiring a specific number of people, is going to create a lot of bureaucratic headaches for the department. Massive might almost be the word, and might distract from DOE's other work. Those are my concerns. So what is DOE's plan to ensure that these new positions aren't duplicating other federal efforts like NOAA or clashing with other existing agency efforts?
So a lot of the work that we're going to be doing is around, for example, demonstration and research. So our plan is to establish demonstration and research hubs, use our laboratories in many instances to demonstrate promising new technologies. There is substantial funding in the IIJA, for example, for hydrogen research and testing, carbon capture and sequestration, advanced nuclear. These are very targeted. And so we are going to make sure that, again, we are spending this money responsibly and that we have experts who can help make that happen.
I very much appreciate that. And I suspect we too will revisit this issue in the future several times. With that, I yield back the balance of the time I don't have either, Madam Chair.
Ms. Bonamici is recognized.
Thank you so much to the chair and ranking member, and thank you to the witnesses for your testimony and your expertise. Thank you, Mr. Lucas, for raising again the issue of our Weather Research and Forecasting Innovation Act, and I look forward to working with you. Your question to Dr. Spinrad, let me know, and I'm happy to collaborate again. Administrator Spinrad, it's very good to see you again. Our federal agencies, in particular NOAA, are tasked with the critical responsibility of capturing and disseminating data to support adaptation and resilience. And as you mentioned, especially in your written testimony, you expanded on the public and all levels of government rely on NOAA's science, observations, and data. So Dr. Spinrad, how can NOAA improve the usability of and access to its climate data, research, and models across all levels of government?
Thank you, Congresswoman Bonamici, and it's a pleasure to see you as well. NOAA is, I would say, always chasing the capability to get our information, products, and services into the hands of decision makers and users. And so what we have really pushed with respect to our activity in the last few months is engagement, building a whole set of new activities. We've done 8 climate and equity roundtables with all over the country with different communities. We've begun a series of industry listening sessions. And of course, we have the capabilities in Sea Grant and our regional integrated sciences and assessments in our regional climate coordinators. So the main thrust in getting the products out is, first of all, reaching the communities that need the help, especially the most vulnerable communities, but also not simply saying, okay, we heard you, now we're going to throw over the transom what we think you need, but work in a co-development mode. And so this is where our efforts with tribes, and incidentally, we just brought on a full-time advisor for tribal consultation at NOAA specifically for that reason. We have an equity advisor as well. It's about reaching out and co-developing products with those communities.
Thank you. That's really helpful. How would improved consistency in climate data collection and sharing practices across the federal government, how would that benefit federal adaptation efforts?
In short, I think that sort of leveling of the playing field, if you will, or standardization can best be demonstrated by what's happened with weather, where there no longer is a question of, well, which weather product, which temperature prediction is most appropriate. This is something we feel very strongly about at NOAA, which is why we believe this the role of being an authoritative source is critical. We work very closely with our partners, with DOE, with NASA, with all of the other federal agencies. And I think having a clear definition of the roles and responsibilities in that regard can help ensure that there is no question about the authoritative nature of the data, products, and services.
That's great. Thank you so much, Dr. Spinrad. Director Kolb, in your testimony, you highlighted a number of grid hardening measures implemented at various DOE assets, and you specifically mentioned the resilience efforts that the Bonneville Power Administration has undertaken to prevent power lines from igniting. We just had our first drought declaration in Oregon a few days ago, and we're obviously concerned, of course, about wildfires and extreme heat as we experienced last summer. To what extent are resilience efforts such as those implemented at Bonneville developed through engagement with grid operators and other non-governmental experts? And to what extent is DOE sharing lessons learned with grid operators, facility managers, and other stakeholders on the efficiency of its grid resilience strategies?
Okay, well, thank you very much for that question. The Bonneville Power Administration, I have to say, has done an incredible job in really preparing for any threat of wildfire. They have a wildfire mitigation plan that they have executed. They are using vegetation management as a strategy. They are also replacing a lot of their equipment to make sure that it is fire resistant. And they have put in extensive monitoring capacity so that they can detect a wildfire early on. They have done a lot of work with the Army Corps of Engineers, as well as the Bureau of Reclamation, to study the impact of drought. And fortunately, there's no serious impact at this time, but they are very much staying on top of that. So they are working with these other agencies very closely and making sure that they're continuing to stay on top of the situation so that wildfires are not a threat. They also work with our other power marketing administrations. We also have the Western Power Marketing Administration that covers much of the Southwest. And so that relationship between Bonneville and Western Power is extremely important. So Western Power has the benefit of the expertise from Bonneville.
Thank you very much. And as Dr. Spinrad, a fellow Oregonian, knows, the Bonneville Power Administration is located up in the Columbia Gorge, and the fires we've had over the last several years have just been devastating. So thank you for your work to prepare for those. It looks like there's still time on the clock, but I believe it stopped for a bit. So I'm going to yield back the balance. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Mr. Posey is recognized.
I appreciate you holding this here, Chairwoman Stevens. And I ask unanimous consent to include in the record the Executive Order 14008, tackling the climate crisis at home and abroad.
So moved.
Thank you. Doctors Spinrad, Ms. Kolb, and Dr. Carney, in Section 103, Part C of the Executive Order, it states that appropriate federal agencies that include, in part, NOAA and NASA, should coordinate with the Secretary of Defense to develop and submit to the President within 120 days of the order an analysis of the security implications of climate change, climate risk analysis. That can be incorporated into modeling, simulation, wargaming, and other analyses. Has this analysis been completed and submitted to the President? And beyond that, what role did each of your agencies contribute to the analyses? And how will your agency's analyses be used to model, stimulate, or otherwise assist war games for the Department of Defense?
I would be glad to jump in, sir. Thank you, Congressman, for that question. By way of a little color commentary, I spent at least half of my career working for the Department of Navy. So I was encouraged when I saw that language in the executive order. And in fact, DOD has moved quite aggressively. They have developed, our colleagues at DOD have developed a climate assessment tool to be applied to the national security assets. NOAA data are fully incorporated in that tool, and that is part of the product that DOD has prepared. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Kolb?
I am not personally familiar with the work that DOE may have performed on this effort, but more than likely our national laboratories, our nuclear security national laboratories that work very extensively with DOD may have been involved, but that is something that I can provide as a follow-up.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Carney?
Yeah, sir. Similarly, I'm not familiar with the detailed response to the President on this topic, but again, we are in for sharing of data, open source data, working with our colleagues here on the panel to get a consistent voice and a consistent set of data that we can help use across the whole federal agency. So we can definitely follow up on that, progress down that path. Thank you.
And I had submitted a request of that information to your agency, so I'm sorry they didn't touch base with you on it. Dr. Spinrad, in the same executive order, Section 216, states that NOAA will be one of the main agencies to solicit input from stakeholders in identifying strategies that will encourage broad participation in the goal of conserving 30% of our lands and waters by 2030. Since this goal has a deadline of only 8 years away, what are the strategies NOAA has identified to conserve 30% of our lands and waters?
Yeah, thank you. So there are a number of aspects of the America the Beautiful initiative, one of which is getting a clear definition of what conservation means. And we've spent a lot of time talking about that, especially in the context of an agency like NOAA, where we're balancing conservation and environmental stewardship with economic development. So we want to make sure that definition is well in hand with respect to how we identify those lands. We are also across the agencies through the interagency mechanisms that we've got, identifying those areas that qualify for consideration under the 30 by 30 designation. And in NOAA, for example, one of our primary efforts is associated with the designation of national marine sanctuaries. So this past summer, we designated a new national marine sanctuary in Wisconsin. We also designate national estuarine research reserves and have done that around the country as well. So for us, it's using existing authorities to establish reserves and sanctuaries in the context of what the definition of conservation means.
Thank you very much, Dr. Spinrad. I want to thank the witnesses and see my time has expired. I yield back. Thank you.
Mr. Bowman is recognized.
Mr. Gomez, thank you for your testimony. You discussed the need for enhanced working relationships between federal, state, and local governments. In Westchester County in New York, which I represent, there's a group of local, county, and state officials called United Westchester that coordinates on storm planning and response efforts. They have been issuing and updating detailed recommendations on what local utilities need to do better to deal with extreme events like Hurricane Ida, for example. I'd like to ask what opportunities you see for not only better information flows in one direction, but also for genuine collaboration between different levels of government on climate resilience. How can the federal government learn from what communities in Westchester and elsewhere are already doing, better understand their needs, and feed that information back into national strategy making? What can we in Congress do to build more capacity for this?
Thank you for that question. And yes, you raised a really good point that there is a need for continued federal involvement to help state, local, tribal, private folks better understand what their risks are through information that's provided, but also making sure that that information is translated, right, so that they can understand it. We do know of many partnerships that federal agencies play with local communities, and you mentioned the utility area. So that is also an area where the Department of Energy has partnered up with utilities to make sure that they are building, for example, resilience to a changing climate. But in our work, when we go out and talk to state, local, tribal folks, they always say the need for more, better information from federal agencies. And that is part of our disaster resilience framework as well, is to make sure that we're providing the information that decision makers need, not just at the federal level, but all levels of government.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Gomez, as you know, this kind of collaboration is crucial for embedding equity and justice in our resilience efforts. In my district and around the country, community groups often work closely with universities and government agencies on environmental justice issues, including NOAA. Dr. Spinrad, you spoke to this in your response to Representative Bonamici. Do you have anything to add here, given your agency's extensive work with local communities?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I referred to the climate and equity roundtables that we had conducted, each of which was focused on a particular concern: heat in the Southwest, flooding in the Northeast. And we made a special effort because it was about equity, that is to say the roundtable discussions, to bring in clergy, community workers, local emergency managers. The outcome of this is we now have 8 pilot projects that we are undertaking to demonstrate how we can deliver products and services more equitably and effectively for the communities that we began engaging with in these roundtables.
Mm-hmm. I have a question for Mr. Kolb. Thank you, Mr. Kolb, for your testimony. I'm wondering if you could elaborate on how DOE thinks about the relationship between resilience and decarbonization strategies and how to integrate the two. At last week's IPCC report, as last week's IPCC report reminded us, if we fail to cut emissions much more quickly, it will be harder and harder to figure out how to adapt. So, for example, if we are going to invest in protecting our K-12 students from climate disasters, I think we should be installing solar panels and heat pumps in public school facilities as part of the same effort. You gave several other examples in your testimony. Can you talk about how DOE is seeking out co-benefits between mitigation and adaptation?
Oh, absolutely. Thank you for this question. This is a great question because there are so many linkages between resilience and sustainability and those co-benefits that you talk about, because the more we can reduce greenhouse gas emissions, it just helps with our resilience efforts. So at the Department of Energy, of course, we are committed to meeting the president's goals that he has set forth in executive order just last December. But there are three areas that I really want to highlight. The first one is making sure that we are using carbon pollution-free electricity. And at the Department of Energy, we're committed to doing this by the year 2030, which is going to be quite a challenge. But we're going to do that through, you were talking about solar panels. So on-site renewable energy is going to be an important piece of that. Also, working with utilities to make sure that they are providing electricity that is sourced from clean energy sources. And then also an important part is making sure that we are reducing the amount of energy we need by making our facilities more energy efficient. So that's really important. Another piece has to do with zero emission vehicles. The Department of Energy and all other agencies are committed to making sure that we are moving to zero emission vehicles. And for our light duty vehicles, our goal is to accomplish that by the year 2027, which is just around the corner. And then finally, we're focused on our buildings. Like some of my colleagues have already mentioned, at the Department of Energy, we have a lot of very old structures. They are not energy efficient. And so we need to make sure that our new facilities that we construct are energy efficient and do a lot of work to renovate the old buildings to make sure that they come up to standard. So those are just some of the things that we're doing. And also through the funding that has been provided through the IIJA, we will be helping the communities across the nation achieve these same sort of goals. So thank you for your question.
Thank you. I yield back my time. Thank you.
Mr. Weber is recognized.
Thank you, Ms. Kolb. These questions will be for you. You say that, or can you talk about, the retrofitting facilities versus building new facilities. Mm-hmm. And you say climate risk should be incorporated into both, but it's going to be different challenges adapting existing buildings compared to factoring in risks as you build new ones. So my question is has there been a study done on that difference?
I'm not aware of a specific study, but for example, if you can start from scratch, you can use the latest building codes, which is what we are doing, and make sure that you are constructing an energy efficient building, zero emissions building. But if you have an old building, it's much more hard to retrofit. You can change out the HVAC, you can change out the underlying utilities, but it is much more expensive to have to renovate an older building. I mean, it's just.
Well, I was an air conditioning contractor for 35 years. So the cost of property, the cost of the building, and the cost of everything, that all has to be decided. And I would hope there would be a study done as to the existing facilities and what that would look like. I'm going to change to another question. You said carbon-free electricity by 2030.
Yes.
Are you aware of last year, Texas went through a winter storm in February that was the coldest on the Gulf Coast we had seen in probably hundreds and hundreds of years. I've lived there 68 years, never seen it. I just looked hundreds of years old. But do we take into account any of the effect when you talk about carbon-free electricity? You talk about windmills and solar panels. Windmills failed in Texas. They froze up. They did things, and it's 20% of Texas' electricity. As you know, Texas is the #1 windmill state. #2 in solar panels. California is just out in solar panels. When you talk about going carbon-free electricity by 2030, is there any information, another study done on how that affects the actual energy market itself in the economy?
I'm sure studies have been done. I am not familiar with them, but at the Department of Energy, it's not just renewable energy, but also clean energy sources. And that's why we're working very hard on, for example, micro reactors. Our Idaho National Laboratory, which is our nuclear laboratory, is focused on those, as well as small modular nuclear reactors. Our National Energy Technology Laboratory in West Virginia, Pennsylvania, and Oregon is busily working on carbon capture and sequestration technologies. So those are all other ways that we're going to be able to meet our goal of carbon and pollution-free electricity.
Yeah, well, I have the largest carbon capture sequestration storage facility in my district over in Port Arthur, Texas. When you talk about windmills and stuff, you're aware of all the amount of rare earth metals and stuff that goes into the production of windmills. What's the expected life of a windmill? Do you know?
I don't know what the expected life is. But again,
has there been any discussion about?
There may have been. I think what we need to focus on, though, too, is there's not just one answer. There are, there's solar technology, there's wind, there's biomass, there's carbon capture and sequestration, nuclear. We need to make sure that we have, we're drawing from all of these different energy sources.
Okay, last question. I got a minute left. Last question.
Okay.
Given the geopolitical situation that's happening over with Russia and Ukraine and the attack that's going on, and the fact that we are beholden to Russia for their oil and gas, has there been any discussion of the Department of Energy that we really ought to be thinking about this from a strategic standpoint of national security, and I'll add energy security, and I'll add domestic security, economic security, because if you don't have a lot of strong fuel available, you're not going to power tanks and jet airplanes. Is there any thought that the DOE given to discussing what that means to national security?
I have not been involved in those discussions, so I don't feel I can comment on that.
Yeah, I expected so. I yield back.
Ms. Stansberry is recognized.
Thank you so much, and good morning to everyone. And thank you, Madam Chair, for convening this important hearing this morning. As some of you know, I've actually spent my entire career working especially on water resources and climate resilience and adaptation and drought issues. I'm a bona fide water nerd to my core, and so I'm excited to be here with you all this morning. And, this hearing couldn't possibly be more timely with the release of the IPCC's adaptation report that came out last week, which not only highlighted the actions that we need to take as a world to prepare our communities for adaptation and resilience, but the urgent call to action to address our carbon footprint immediately before we pass that threshold and we have such irrevocable damage and change to our planet that we can't turn back. And similarly, a couple of weeks ago, a very important study was released that identified that currently the American Southwest is experiencing the worst drought conditions that have occurred in over 1,200 years. And I think what these reports really reveal is that climate change is already here. Our communities are already experiencing it. And I know in my home state of New Mexico, nowhere is this more clear than in our hydrologic and our water systems. And really, as I often say, water is ground zero for climate change. And so while we have to take urgent action to cut our carbon footprint, to cut emissions, to prevent climate change from worsening, we have to actually engage and prepare our communities for the change that's already here. So I've spent much of my career thinking about and working on these issues, working as a researcher. I'm an interdisciplinary science nerd, working between social and natural science on water resources planning. I was a state legislator during the Obama administration. I worked at OMB on a number of the resilience and adaptation executive orders that some of the folks here worked on. And I also worked on the Hill before being elected to Congress on the Energy Committee, working on climate adaptation and resilience. So this is really a lifelong passion. But I think like some of the other questions that have been asked this morning and the comments that have been made is where the rubber really hits the road in climate adaptation is in our communities. It's how do we translate science, data, information into useful tools and resources that our communities and individual decision makers can actually use to make decisions that help our communities be more resilient. And to that end, in the state legislature, I sponsored a Water Data Act, and we're planning to unveil a federal Water Data Act soon, which will help to create more integration and interoperability in the way that our federal government brings data together and helps to unlock the power of big data to help our communities. But I want to just take a moment to say that, I think that oftentimes when we talk about climate adaptation and resilience, we focus on the action and not as much on the need to integrate the science and data to make it possible to take meaningful action. And that's why I think it's so important that we're having this hearing in SST this morning. So, we have to make sure that we are downscaling our climate models to actual local level models and tools that our communities can use. We have to take the existing data sets that already exist, translate those into meaningful tools that our communities can actually use. And then we need to be providing resources to our communities to actually take those actions, because the scale of what we're talking about, whether in New Mexico, we're talking about a tribal community being able to manage their water resources, looking for the next several generations, our acequias that have been managing their water resources for hundreds of years, or a farmer who's trying to decide, what do I plant this season? What kind of loans do I take out? What kind of debt can I incur? Will there even be water for me to plant my trees or my chile or whatever I'm planning to plant? We need tools to be able to inform our communities so that they can make those kinds of decisions at the granular level that really affects the kind of everyday choices that people have to make. So to that end, Dr. Spinrad, Administrator, I'm so grateful that you're back in service. Could you talk a little bit about the need and what it would take to develop more sort of community-based tools using science and data, and what that looks like, and how we in Congress can help to support that enterprise?
Thank you for that so much, Congresswoman, and thank you also for all of your support through the years on these issues. If I go to a product like the National Integrated Drought Information System, and I know you're very familiar with NIDIS, I would argue that's an example of how we can work with stakeholders, figure out what the products and services are that we need to develop, and then iterate on that. Part of this is educating the user community. Part of it is also being able to have that user community express their requirements in ways that we can translate into science, into research and development. So we don't have a lot of time now to go into the details of it, but my basic argument would be, let's take what works in NIDIS as an example, expand on that, bringing in the social sciences, as you indicate, working with a broader set of users and stakeholders. And then the last element I'd put into this is I actually believe this is a great place for private sector development as well, because the federal government will never be able to provide that fine granularity of products and services that you alluded to for every user and stakeholder. But if we work closely with the private sector, we can have an effective relationship to get people what they need to make decisions.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Administrator. I think that kind of role for the federal government in convening and making its own data and tools more community-based and available are really crucial, and helping to stimulate that private sector activity. And another great example, and I know I'm out of time here, is the Weather Service, right? The tools that the Weather Service and all of our science agencies bring together to make big data available to plan your day out in partnership with the private sector really are a great demonstration of how we can do this. And I think if we're going to prepare our communities for climate change, we need those kinds of partnerships across our country, across the planet, across every sector. And that is what is going to be the crucial building block to helping our communities adapt to climate change. So really appreciate your testimony this morning. And with that, Madam Chair, I yield back. Thank you.
Ms. Bice is recognized.
Thank you. As ranking member on the environmental subcommittee, I understand the importance of increasing our resiliency to extreme weather events and more frequent environmental hazards. Through this committee, we heavily emphasize the efforts to discover new technologies and prepare humans for environmental changes. Ms. Kolb, you mentioned earlier in questioning from Mr. Lucas that you were hiring what I would consider to be a large workforce that is being established through the new Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations. My concern here is that this workforce is actually taking away dollars that we could be investing in technology and innovation and research to be able to really find clean energy solutions with the private sector. Can you tell me how you're sort of working through that process?
So we are just beginning the hiring process. And as a matter of fact, we established a portal and invited, experts to apply for positions. We received 10,000 applications. And we've been systematically going through those applications because we really want to get the very best people. But we were really.
But why are we not partnering with other agencies? There are so many other agencies, including DOE, that have the capability to sort of take this and run with it. Why are we adding another layer with a large workforce to government?
So within DOE, we have a substantial workforce, and they have a lot of responsibilities. So as I mentioned, we received $62 billion in new responsibility, and we need a good team, a good set of experts in order to make sure that this money is spent appropriately, properly, and for projects that are really going to make a difference.
So a third of the money that you've been appropriated is going just for staff. Is that correct?
I don't know how much is going to be spent on staff.
It says 20 billion is looking to be spent to stand up the committee. I would assume a significant portion of that would be to hire this 1,000-person workforce.
I don't know how much it costs for a 1,000-person workforce, but I can't imagine that it's that much.
Okay, thank you. Minister Spinrad, when you testified in September, you mentioned that NOAA's efforts to work closely with communities to implement preparedness plans for extreme weather events. And certainly Oklahoma knows a few things about extreme weather events. I'd like to hear more about how NOAA advertises its services. Do you think that there's public awareness for the agency and the work that you're trying to do?
Thank you for that question. The short answer is some. And I actually do an informal poll as I go around the country to just test the waters and see how well informed the public is about what we can and cannot do. Obviously, local emergency managers and a lot of county commissioners are well familiar with what we do, but not enough. And so that's why programs like Sea Grant, like our regional coordinators, like our cooperative institutes all around the country through universities serve more than just the delivery function for products and services. They are also an engagement group. And so we have actually started a program called NOAA Ambassadors to encourage our workforce to, if you will, get out more and talk the talk about what we can do with school groups, with church groups, local communities, local industry, chambers of commerce. We just started that. We have a few hundred ambassadors now. I'm optimistic that this will help get to the issue that you've identified.
So you have these ambassadors. Are you also utilizing state and local government entities to be able to spread the message? Because I feel like there might be some sort of disconnect with educating the general public about the services that you're providing.
Yeah, I've personally taken a campaign to engage. So I've worked with the National Governors Association, National State Floodplain Managers, all of the various groups. I've worked with a number of mayors groups as well. So I'm trying through example at my level to get our regional folks, and most of our workforce is around the country, they're not in DC, to get them to understand that that's an important component of outreach for us. And thus far, I think we've had a lot of success. The measure of success, of course, is how much are they reaching back to us for the products and services. And I think we're doing better on that.
Great, thank you. Madam Chair, I'm about out of time. I yield back the balance.
Mr. McNerney is recognized.
Well, I thank the chair. I thank the witnesses. Your testimony here is very important to me and to the country. So I thank you. Dr. Spinrad, in your testimony, you discussed how NOAA's climate data, including data for solar radiation management, is instrumental in the development of a number of risk assessment and mapping exercises, as well as climate action plans for federal agencies. In your view, are there still major gaps or weaknesses in the data or technology used in these risk analysis?
I would argue that in terms of the variety of data that we collect, greenhouse gases, temperatures, vertical profiles of humidity, I think we're doing well in terms of the variety of different observations. I could throw ocean acidification in there and sea levels and that sort of thing. The challenge for us is the quantity of the data, the resolution, if you will. So if you look at something like greenhouse gas observations, we do those. We actually do it around the world. Do we have enough resolution? Are there enough measurements around the world to adequately be able to predict the variability? No. And so I would argue that we're doing pretty well on the types of measurements. We could do better on the quantity and granularity, if you will, of those measurements.
There are big gaps in sort of regions like the polar region that have big impact on the weather and impact on other parts of the climate system?
Yeah, polar would be one. I can tell you that one of the challenges we're dealing with is enough observations in the middle of the ocean. It may sound strange, but a lot of the heat that has been generated, in fact, probably 90% of the heat that has been added to the system is in the oceans, but we don't have observations throughout the oceans adequately enough to know exactly where it's going.
Thank you. Ms. Kolb, in your testimony, you discussed the various climate hazards that put DOE facilities at risk, including the loss of electricity as a result of wildfires, which we're experiencing in the western part of the country. What is the agency, the DOE, doing to make facilities more resilient and able to function if grid connectivity is lost?
So one of the ways that we want to make sure that we have redundant power sources. So whether that's a micro reactor, a micro nuclear reactor, or if it's on-site renewable energy sources such as solar or wind, that's going to be that's a key part of our sustainability and our adaptation and resilience strategy, making sure that we have those redundant sources.
How many, I mean, you don't have any micro nuclear reactors ready to go, do you?
Not yet, but we will. And
Okay.
yeah, and also one of the things to keep in mind at the Department of Energy, a lot of our sites are in fairly remote areas. And one of the assets that we have a lot of land. We have acres upon acres, thousands of acres of land that are vacant right now. And so one of our thoughts is that we need to put at least some of this land to better use by using it for renewable energy sources.
Thank you. As the federal agencies create climate adaptation plans to protect the infrastructure and employees and data and so on, it'll be important to create metrics to track the process. So I'd like to ask each of the panel members or anyone that really wants to step up, has your agency developed metrics to assess resilience, and how do you plan to measure your progress? Maybe Mrs. Kolb would be the best to answer this one.
Yeah, I will go ahead and start. That is a challenge, and I listed in my testimony as metrics for determining our success and resilience to be a challenge for us that we are focused on. Because the question is, how do you know when you're resilient enough? What does that look like? How do you measure that? So that is something that we're working on, and we'll be looking to our colleagues at NOAA and NASA and other places to help us with this question.
Dr. Spinrad?
Yeah, I echo what Ms. Kolb just said. I've got to agree that knowing where the thresholds and objectives are in resilience is important. I'd add simply from NOAA's perspective, as you saw in my testimony, I talked about lives, livelihoods, and quality of life. So there are metrics with respect to lives saved or property that did not get damaged as a result of a major storm. There are quantitative assessments we can put in there, and we are seeing progress in that regard by applying some of these measures already.
So as I run out of time, it sounds like metrics is an area where we put some significant focus in planning for the future. Thank you, and I yield back.
Mr. Babin is recognized.
Thank you. I really appreciate this and appreciate the witnesses today as well. I'm going to start out with Dr. Carney. NASA's authority to enter into new enhanced use leases, or EULs, expired at the end of last year. EULs allow NASA centers to lease underutilized property to the private sector and use those funds collected to upgrade and maintain those NASA facilities. Very important. The House passed a decade-long EUL extension in December, which I was an original co-sponsor. The Senate changed that bill to only extend that authority until this month in March of 22. When considering the Senate's amendment, the House hijacked the language, stripped the EUL extension, and turned it into a controversial voting rights bill that is now dead in the Senate. In the meantime, California's Department of Forestry and Fire Protection sought to use the underutilized NASA Ames Research Center facility to support firefighters and their equipment. Because of the lapse in EUL authority, it appears as though NASA used a different agreement to allow CAL FIRE to use those NASA facilities. The result is that NASA Ames was unable to recoup funding to upgrade and maintain their aging infrastructure to meet their growing needs. That means, had we used the opportunity to pass our bipartisan bill in the first place, NASA would have had more money to be able to spend on updating infrastructure and better preparing its facilities. Plain and simple, a missed opportunity. So, Dr. Carney, are there any other projects at NASA that are suffering the same fate?
Yes, sir. Thank you for bringing this topic up. It is, one of the few levers that we do have to, really focus on our underutilized facilities, because we do have them. And the rate at which we can demo some of our underutilized facilities is a little bit slow in terms of our budgeting opportunities. So the Enhanced Use Lease Authority is something that really gives us an opportunity to improve those, partner with, space community and or any others that could use that facility for rocket test or what have you. So the one you mentioned, so CAL FIRE and the Ames Research Center, that is a specific example of an EUL that's an opportunity missed. I think we, may be trying other ways to try to help, because we do want to help with our wildfire situation and bring to bear both the data and the ability that we have to inform the community about wildfires and work on that relationship. Another one, and so that's specific towards climate and forwarding the climate studies. Virginia Commercial Space Flight Authority and the Goddard Space Flight Wallops Flight Center Wallops Flight Facility is another example of an EUL that's in consideration right now that can help us prepare and prepare for shoreline restoration issues and to protect against erosion. So the inability for us to enter in that EUL is inhibiting our ability to gain traction. There is another example. Florida Power and Light with Kennedy Space Center is another example. So we're trying to use EUL proceeds to promote investments in new power and new substations. So
I appreciate you bringing those out, because it's not just an isolated incident. This has a ripple effect all across. So thank you very much. Now I'd like to go to Administrator Spinrad. NOAA has extensive and advanced modeling and data that are used to support and enhance capabilities in many different ways, some of which have military capabilities. NOAA also has many international partners and collaborates on a global scale. What is NOAA doing to make sure this data has protections in place to ensure bad actors do not have access to sensitive information, and should we be doing more?
Thank you, sir. I really appreciate that. As I indicated earlier, just starting the response from a personal perspective, having spent a good portion of my career working for Navy, I am particularly sensitive to the issues that you have identified. So we have undertaken a number of specific efforts under the direction of my Chief Information Officer. We've created a research security team specifically to look into these kinds of concerns. And the very first thing we've done is develop what we call a foreign national internal risk mitigation plan, which basically provides training and tools to ensure that we are protecting the assets and information so it doesn't go into the wrong place. Let's put it that way. These have recently been stood up, and already I've been briefed twice on this, and I'm convinced this will be an effective tool to build the sorts of screens that your question alluded to.
Okay, I had some more to talk about, but I see that my time is up. So I will yield back my time, Madam Chair.
Great, thank you. And
Okay.
we're going to pass the chairwomanship over to the great Congresswoman from North Carolina, Congresswoman Deborah Ross will take over the chairmanship. I need to head to the floor for remarks, but thank you to our witnesses again for today's really important hearing. It was a delight and honor to be with all of you.
Great. Okay, is Congressman Caston next?
Happy to be, if you'll allow me to be.
Yes, Mr. Caston is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I got to admit, I am, the longer I'm in this line of work, the more speechless I am at how many of my colleagues think that we can debate the law of physics and put people's lives at risk. The IPCC report just came out and said that climate change is outpacing our ability to adapt. We had $160 billion in insured losses last year. 40% of Americans faced extreme weather events. And my colleagues think we should stop investing in wind because Texas failed to winterize them. My God, what is our job here? To embarrass our grandchildren? These are serious issues. This is massive. So, Dr. Spinrad, I want to thank you for the NOAA report you just issued on sea level rise. It scared the bejesus out of me. That report, if I'm following it right, included, among other things, predicting 14 to 18 inches of sea level rise on the Gulf Coast by 2050, 12 inches in Sarasota County and Manatee County in Florida by 2050. Do I have those numbers about right? I don't want to misrepresent it, but
they're very close. And the important point, if I can, is that the accuracy of those numbers, the ranges are very small. That's really the important point. There is no longer any equivocation about this happening.
Well, thank you for scaring me more. Do you have a sense of how many homes are at risk of loss at that level of sea level rise?
Not that number specifically, but I do know that the number we use often is that 40% of the U.S. population resides in coastal counties. So one can get some indicator from that number.
Okay, well, I don't know the number either, but your report drove me to spend a lot of time looking at topographical maps of the United States. And, if I'm just eyeballing it, it looks like most of Louisiana south of I-10 is at risk of loss. It looks like, significant portions, certainly maybe not 10%, but getting close to 10% of Manatee County looks like it's within that sea level band. This is by 2050. Now, I really appreciate your report. I really appreciate your effort to sort of localize this within communities. I am troubled by the interagency communication. I sit on the Financial Services Committee. We had Chairman Powell before us, Chair Pro Tem Powell, I should say, last week. And when I read those numbers to him, I asked him whether Fannie and Freddie are making any effort to modify their lending agreements, because an 18-inch sea level rise on the Gulf Coast by 2050 means there are homes that were mortgaged today that will be lost before that mortgage is repaid. He had a very short answer to me, no. I then asked him whether there was any reason to believe that the commercial bank sector is not going to look at the federal government and say, these suckers will take our risk. I'm going to start offloading all my long-term mortgages onto Fannie and Freddie. He said, that's unreasonable. I don't want to reiterate all that, but we are looking at massive loss of wealth on the coasts. We have a massive political problem, as long as my colleagues keep thinking this is a good problem to politicize rather than to face up to. And I'd like to understand, to what degree what does the interagency communication on this look like, with the Fed, with Treasury, with the folks who have a very narrow amount of time, but potentially the amount of time to, if we can't physically protect ourselves, can we at least financially protect ourselves from some of these risks? And when the Fed isn't even thinking about it yet, I'm nervous about the clock. So can you help me out with what you've been doing on that?
Yeah, I think I can a bit with some information as recent as last Friday. So when I came on board as NOAA administrator, we established a NOAA Climate Council. It's basically my most senior career and political folks that are working all of the climate issues. And I said, one of the things we're going to do is work in a sort of bilateral fashion with our agency partners. On Friday, we had an hour discussion with leadership from the Department of Treasury, talking about physical risk, economic or financial risk, transition risk, and they are sharing with us their needs for products and services. We're doing the same thing with our other agency partners as well. I should point out the sea level rise product you talked about was done collaboratively with our partners at NASA and many other federal agencies. So there's both the formal interagency engagement and then what we are initiating in our respective agencies. And I am encouraged that we're having a meaningful dialogue. I can tell you in my 35 years in federal government, I could count on one hand the number of meetings I've had with Treasury. This was the most significant, and I'm encouraged there's a good way forward for co-development products.
Okay, well, I'm about out of time. I'm glad to hear you're doing that. I would just, hopefully you won't disagree with me that what we are all doing who are trying to do this is not yet enough, because as long as the chairman's answer to that question is no, we've got a real problem. And, I'll end with the way I started. We are sitting here right now with our colleagues in the Senate refusing to even confirm people to the Federal Reserve because they have the temerity to suggest that we should actually understand this math when regulating our financial system. And as my colleagues have heard me say many times, I'm a firm believer that the only thing that matters in this life is whether your grandchildren can say you're proud of you. And some of my colleagues are failing that test right now. Thank you. I yield back.
Ms. Kim is recognized.
Thank you. I'd like to thank all of our witnesses for appearing before our committee today. And I also want to congratulate NASA and NOAA on a successful GHOST-T launch. And I'm very much looking forward to its contributions to meteorology, including improved monitoring of wildfires on the West Coast. As you know, California, the state that I represent, is currently facing a record-breaking drought and continues to grapple with fire seasons that look more like fire years. And according to 2021 CAL FIRE numbers, over 8,800 wildfires destroyed 3,629 structures, and they took 3 lives and burned 2.5 million acres. I know before me, Representative McNerney directed this question to DOE, but I'd like to direct the same questions to all of our witnesses today. So Dr. Spinrad, Ms. Kolb, and Dr. Carney, what actions are your agencies taking to mitigate the risk of losing structures in California and in other Western states to wildfires? And Dr. Gomez, what are your recommendations for NASA, NOAA, and DOE to mitigate the risk of wildfires damaging infrastructure?
Would be glad to go ahead and start the answer. As you know, NOAA has a number of equities that we bring to the table with respect to addressing wildfires. The first, of course, is our ability to detect them using the sensors on platforms like the satellite we just launched, which has a lightning mapper on it, so we can start to help mobilize responders to where we think the fires are going to break out. We also have incident meteorologists that are on scene to provide the up-to-the-minute forecast information that the firefighters and responders need. And then, of course, we provide predictions, both of the larger weather picture and the micro weather that's happening within the fire. All of those efforts are standard operating procedure for us, but it's not good enough. And so in our 22 president's budget, we actually included some increases for more incident meteorologists, also to build a fire weather test bed to improve our products and services. So we are continuing to grow that effort. We're continuing to work closely with our colleagues in FEMA and in the state forestry offices and CAL FIRE, for example. And so basically it's an enhancement of the products and equities that we have built over the years to provide a broader set of applications.
Thank you. Ms. Kolb?
Okay. Well, thank you very much for that question. As you know, we have 4 laboratories in the state of California, and they're laboratories that are very important to us. And fortunately, none of them have been directly threatened by wildfires, except what has happened, for example, at Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory. They had to shut down operations because PG&E had to, cut the flow of electricity to deal with wildfires. And so that meant our operations went down. And given the important missions that the department is responsible for, that's just not acceptable to us. So what we are doing at that laboratory, as well as our other laboratories, is making sure that we have redundant power sources on site so that we have that backup generation if the flow of electricity to our site is cut off. So that is the main thing that we are doing.
Dr. Carney?
Yes, thank you. So we have the variability also with 3 field centers in California. And we have the flooding concerns in Ames up in San Francisco. We have Jet Propulsion Lab in Southern California, and then we have the more arid Armstrong. And so we have quite a variety of climates to deal with in those 3 centers, and are interested in helping move that forward. But specific to the wildfires, both our Science Mission Directorate and our Aeronautics Research Mission Directorate are intimately involved in trying to help with the wildfire analysis, the data collection, and then the decision making on based on that data, and working with the local communities to respond and mitigate those wildfires. And so some of the examples are a program called Stereo, which is scalable traffic management for emergency response operations. We also have a global fire emissions database that is something we can access. And again, we collaborate with many of the panel members here as well as others in the community. So this is one of the good examples, I think, where we are actually integrating with the local community and really informing them and trying to help them make decisions at the local area to try to save lives and save infrastructure.
Thank you. I know we've got time's running out, but I want to ask a quick question to Ms. Kolb. The Department of Defense has stated their goal is to use technological developments like quantum computing, 5G, artificial intelligence, and data analytics to increase their capacity to forecast, predict, and plan for climate national security risk. And that also extends to extreme weather events, food scarcity, water shortages, and beyond. So can you talk about DOE's work in these advanced technology fields and how the department is applying those to assist in federal climate adaptation efforts?
So absolutely. First of all, at a couple of our laboratories, Argonne National Laboratory in particular, as well as our Pacific Northwest National Laboratory, we have some of the world's best climate scientists that are working on all the issues that we are talking about. Also at these laboratories and our others as well, we have tremendous supercomputer capabilities, the quantum computing that you were mentioning, work in artificial intelligence. I mean, our national laboratories are a tremendous resource, and they are working collaboratively to develop technologies, clean energy technologies that are going to help build greater resilience, not only at our laboratories, but for the nation as a whole. So they are very actively working on that. Some specific areas that they're really focused on
Ms.
nuclear
Kolb,
energy.
your time has gone well past expired. So if you could wrap up quickly, that would be great. Ms. Kolb.
Nuclear energy, carbon capture and sequestration are just a couple of examples.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Ross, for allowing me to go over time with our witness. Thank you.
Ms. Moore is recognized.
Thank you so very, very much. This is a very important hearing, and I want to thank all the witnesses for their expert testimony. I'm really so glad that just after 1 week of being President of the United States, Joe Biden signed this executive order to put together a program to tackle climate change and to focus on collaboration, assess our vulnerabilities, adaptation, and resilience. Part of that executive order was to have 23 agencies come together to collaborate. And I guess one of the things that I have not noticed, at least in this hearing, that there's been any discussion of a medical infrastructure. I had my very first asthma attack as a child shoveling coal into a furnace. And of course, we do know the health impacts of climate change, whether it's wildfires, coal or whatever that causes asthma, greenhouse gases, heart disease, heat strokes, hypothermia. So what can you all tell me about the collaboration you're doing with HHS in anticipation of this? What will you do with very, very sick people who suffer from climate action? Guess that's, since HHS is not here, just shoot it to the panel for whoever to answer that may feel most qualified to do it.
Congresswoman Moore, thank you for that. I'm not sure I'm the most qualified, but there's a very specific part of the answer that I wanted to share with you. And when the White House stood up the National Climate Task Force under the leadership of Gina McCarthy, we established 5 working groups, one of which is an interagency working group on heat health with a specific focus on extreme heat, but we're not limiting it necessarily to just heat health. I co-chair that with HHS Secretary Becerra and with EPA Administrator Regan. We have used this body to aggressively go after developing a national integrated heat health information system, modeled after the NIDIS, the Integrated Drought Information System, to do exactly what you're talking about for the issues of heat health. That is one piece. The other that I can share from a NOAA perspective is we have begun a very active dialogue with the American Medical Association, a group we had never talked with before. When I called them, their first reaction was, "Why are you calling us?" By the time we were done, we had agreed to have joint committees to work on a variety of things, from dermatology to public health to climate impacts and environmental impacts on a broad array of medical issues. So there's 2 examples of where I'd say the federal agencies are working aggressively to address a spectrum of heat or of health issues.
Question. I know that that NOAA is really doing the technical support around the mapping program. And when we think about people who live on the water, we think about people who live in the mansions on the Great Lakes or something, but there are plenty of poor people. I mean, think Katrina, who live near water. And I'm wondering if your mapping specifically sort of disaggregates people who live, the rich people by the waterfront and poorer communities, so that a response can go to the most needy in terms of building up that infrastructure. I mean, poor people can't just jump in their big SUV and escape a climate activity. So I'm wondering if there's a disaggregation of those data.
Very briefly, one of the advantages of NOAA's being in the Department of Commerce is one of our sister bureaus is, of course, the Census Bureau. So we have worked with the Census Bureau effectively to develop a map of climate vulnerability by socioeconomic indicators, so that you can do exactly what you're talking about. You can look at a coastal area and say, where are those lower, more impoverished areas, where are the ones where, for example, English may not be the predominant language, so that we know how to get information out tuned to the needs of those communities.
Thank you so much. And so the Great Lakes, I got 14 seconds. You guys, 50% of our trade is between the United States and Canada, goes through the Great Lakes. Is this a focus of your work? Dr. Spinrad?
Yes, absolutely. We could go into great detail, but working with the Great Lakes Environmental Research Lab, with our Sea Grant programs, with the joint Canadian government bilateral agreements we've got, treaties, absolutely, yes.
I thought for sure the chairwoman would indulge me to talk about the Great Lakes, so I squeezed it in. Thank you, and I yield back.
Mr. Feenstra is recognized.
Thank you, Chairwoman Ross and Ranking Member Lucas, and thank you to all our witnesses for their testimony and sharing your extensive experience and knowledge on this subject. Before I begin, my family and I are praying for those that were impacted by Saturday night's devastating tornadoes in Iowa, and the families that were tragically lost loved ones in this tornado. We all know these storms all too well in Iowa and the toll they take on our farmers and our families and our businesses. But in Iowa, we're always resilient. Administrator Spinrad, it's no secret that NOAA has had its fair share of dissemination issues, including during the Iowa tornadoes this past weekend. We can collect all the data in the world, we can run the best models, and know exactly what is going to happen. But if we can't get the warnings and alerts out to the public in a timely manner, the effort is wasted. Related to this tragedy on Saturday, there was a lot of technical issues with the National Weather Service that delayed wireless emergency alerts up to 7 minutes. As you know, we've discussed in earlier hearings, quick and timely weather detection and alerts are absolutely crucial for those in my state, especially when we have deadly severe weather events like the tornado of this past weekend. Can you elaborate on what caused what causes these delays during events like we had over the weekend, and what steps we can do to prevent some of these dissemination delays so they don't continue to occur?
Thank you, Congressman. Let me start also by expressing my condolences and my sincere sympathies to the families of the 7 individuals who passed away. That's unacceptable. We can't have deaths. I will share with you that for the reasons that you indicated, we have built a lot of redundancy in the communications mechanisms that we've got. So it can be NOAA weather radio, it can be through chat, it can be through a variety of social media. In this particular case, we had advisories going out 5 days beforehand, and the lead time for the warnings in all cases was 20 minutes, which is well beyond what the average is. Dr. Marshall Shepard had a good piece in today's Forbes, which I would recommend to your staff take a look at. The issue of addressing the individual delays in one of the redundant systems is something we're looking into. We will get back to you once we've done the full after action analysis of what the root cause is. But fortunately, none of everyone who was in the path was, they had a warning available to them in the 20-minute lead time. The full redundancy was not there because of the gaps you alluded to, and we are looking into what the cause of that was.
Well, I appreciate this, Administrator Spinrad. And as you said, just one loss of life is too much. And anything that we can do collaboratively from Congress and working with yourselves, I'm all in, because whether it be Iowa, Oklahoma, or whatever, it continues to occur. I have one other question for you, Administrator. You mentioned NOAA's joint work with the National Institute of Standard and Technology, NIST, to identify and utilize appropriate climate data for application in building standards. As the new ranking member on the Research and Technology Subcommittee, I'm interested in supporting more cross-agency collaborations like this. Can you give us an overview on how NOAA identifies and then executes research with other science agencies like NSF and NIST? Something like NSF's Wall of Wind comes to mind, and its usefulness to hurricane forecast and modeling at NOAA. How can we increase and then sustain mutually beneficial research?
Yeah, thank you for that question. There's a lot of detail I could get into. I would love to come and brief you and your staff on the more detailed answer to it. But in short, we have a number of mechanisms in place. So what you alluded to is actually part of the Department of Commerce Climate Adaptation Plan that we're working on collectively with NIST. We have the benefit through the Office of Science and Technology Policy in having a robust interagency tool. ICAMS, the Interagency Committee on Advancing Meteorological Services. That's where all of our agencies sitting here on the panel actually get to discuss plans and programs for coordination of efforts associated with everything from weather forecasting to resilience. We also have a number of bilateral agreements. I'd call out our agreement with NASA, for example, on how to take the data that NASA collects and the data that NOAA collects and feed them into the models more effectively. So any number of mechanisms. I welcome the opportunity to give you a more detailed explanation.
Well, thanks. I'm excited to hear that. Wonderful. And with that, I yield back.
Ms. Ross is recognized.
Excuse me, could you repeat that?
Sorry, Ms. Ross, you're recognized.
Oh, thank you very much. I thought it was going to be Mr. Foster, but I appreciate his patience. So thank you so much to Chairwoman Johnson, who could not be here, Ranking Member Lucas for holding the hearing, and to all of our witnesses for being with us. As we know, the federal government is not immune to the effects of climate change. And in conjunction with our larger climate change objectives, we must ensure that federal facilities, programs, and investments are equipped to be climate change ready, resilient, and adaptive. As of 2020, my state of North Carolina was second only to Texas for the number of weather and climate-related disasters that cost $1 billion or more. Aside from the harmful effects this has had on our economy and environment, these kinds of consequences stretched federal resources, facilities, and programs thin. I'm interested to hear today about how all of your agencies are working across the government to mitigate the harms of climate change, which we know are only expected to worsen. My first question is related to some work that's been done at North Carolina State University, which received a $5 million grant from NOAA to lead a multi-institutional effort to develop climate resilience solutions in frontline communities in North and South Carolina. And this will dovetail a little bit with what Representative Moore asked about. Dr. Spinrad, how would local projects like these help NOAA achieve its larger climate resilience and mitigation goals? And how do we ensure that the research conducted through these grants aligns with NOAA's climate mitigation goals?
Thank you for that question. And I'll start by thanking Congress for the infrastructure resources that have been provided. You have our spend plans for review right now, and for NOAA, something close to $1.5 billion of those additional resources are going to go towards coastal resilience, also marine pollution. But this will leverage our investments and will be largely supported through grants and awards, not unlike the one that you alluded to NC State, to individualize, if you will, what the solutions are. Are there nature-based solutions? Can we build out marshlands? Can we strengthen or nourish beaches, for example, to mitigate against sea level rise? So you will see a major investment. I will add that all of the spend plans associated with resilience are being and specifically infrastructure are being coordinated. The White House is starting up a climate smart infrastructure task force to look at how we are coordinating across all the 24 roughly agencies that are addressing specifically elements of coastal resiliency.
Thank you very much. Also, North Carolina's 2020 climate science report drew conclusions generally consistent with other dire climate change warnings, including the threat of surge flooding as a result of rising sea level. Dr. Carney, what kinds of immediate steps can be taken to protect NASA's infrastructure along the coast from rising tides, and what impact will inaction have?
Right. Well, thank you for that question, and a very timely one also. And so just I would like to say that, you know, our science mission directorate is really leaning forward here. And I would have to call out the Earth Science and Applied Science Disasters Program as evidence of one area that we're leaning forward to try to provide that exact data that you're talking about in terms of not only seeing the flooding data as it's happening real time, but also being able to project what regions would be inundated, you know, soon after. And so help to plan with the local communities and move that forward. As I've said in this testimony, a lot of our launch infrastructure, of course, is susceptible to flooding. It's at least in the range. We are bolstering up those areas to protect from the flooding impact so that we can maintain our access to space throughout. And even with the high-end flooding predictions that ourselves and NOAA have gone together to measure. So we feel like we're ready to sustain and maintain, given our shoreline impacts and the efforts we've done to become more resilient on those shorelines.
Thank you, and I yield back.
Mr. Oberdotti is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. My question is for Ms. Kolb. I really enjoyed your testimony. Can you talk a little bit more about the tools that the Department of Energy is using with respect to emerging technologies like quantum computing, artificial intelligence, advanced data analytics? Those, as we're all aware, have an incredible potential for allowing a more detailed and accurate prediction of the effects of climate change on our infrastructure and of our efforts to implement climate resilience. Can you talk about how the DOE is catalyzing the use of those tools for those purposes?
Yes, absolutely. So first of all, the Department of Energy has the fastest computers in the world. Our supercomputing capability is just the best in the world, as I said. And we are using that supercomputing capability to address issues with regard to climate change. I mean, that is something we're very focused on, especially at our Argonne National Laboratory. They are using their supercomputers and the information that they're getting through their climate science work to produce models. And they work very closely with NOAA on this as well. And right now, they have models, they've been refining their models, and very soon in the next few months, they are going to be posting a lot of this information online so that communities can use this very detailed information so that they can begin to prepare for climate change in a more active way. So that is something that we are definitely doing at our Argonne National Laboratory, as well as other laboratories like our Pacific Northwest National Laboratory. So very key component to our efforts. But something else that I want to mention too, there's been a lot of discussion about how can agencies work together. And one of the tools that the Department of Energy has is we have an organization called the Federal Energy Management Program. And the purpose of this program is to work with agencies on adaptation, resilience, sustainability efforts. So for example, they developed a tool called the Technical Resilience Navigator. And that tool has been distributed to all agencies to help them with their vulnerability studies, to help them determine what actions are needed in order to address climate change. And they also provide technical assistance to help with that effort. In addition, they provide funding for federal projects. So that is something that we're very proud of, and it's a way that we lift up the entire federal community.
Great. Well, I'm certainly not surprised to hear that the DOE is taking a leadership role in that effort, but I'm very happy to hear you talk about how collaborative these efforts are, because obviously we can be the point of the spear in conducting research and coming up with answers here, but it's meaningless if we don't take a collaborative approach and disseminate that information and the tools that we use to collect it to the agencies that are going to be affected most by those resiliency efforts. So very happy to see you taking a leadership role there, and hope you continue. Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Mr. Foster is recognized.
Yeah, thank you. Am I audible and visible here?
You are, sir.
Yeah, well, first I want to express my disappointment that the question that Representative Obernolte asked was exactly the one that I intended to ask. And I want to say, so I guess great minds think alike here, but I was very encouraged, well, first off at the centrality of Argonne's role in this, and also the importance of collaboration. As the member who represents Argonne, that always makes me smile when I don't have to be the one that brings up their importance. But I was very struck by Dr. Carney's observation about that 2/3 of the economic value of their assets are less than 16 feet above sea level. And so that's an interesting point on what I imagine is a curve that I imagine you prepared. What is the total amount of economic value at risk as a function of the sea level rise? And is that something that you've mapped out for the entire range of sea level rise estimates?
Good question. Thanks. So yes, we have been thinking about that, and we have done extensive sort of studies to look at what are the potential impacts. Of course, as the reports have come out, give a little bit more clarity to what some of those expectations could be. We've heard the numbers of 12 to 18 inch sea level rise by 2050 as an approximate value for those to expect. So we've done our own internal studies, for example, at Kennedy Space Center to try to understand what that means. And as we all know, that's a low level coastal area. And it's an area that we would anticipate almost 25% of that land being enveloped by water. We do believe that our critical infrastructure would be safe in these cases, but again, it's a growing concern and something that we're trying to address with a lot of our shoreline protection efforts. And so similarly, the Wallops Flight Facility has a similar topography, right, and around the coastline. So we're working towards that.
Well, no, it's good that you're thinking about the whole range, because even if we decarbonize our economy, there's no guarantee that other countries will. And so we really at least have to have a plan to protect ourselves against potentially much higher levels of rise of sea level. Ms. Kolb, does the DOE have a comparable estimate? Are there particular facilities, JLab or Brookhaven, that might be at risk from significant sea level rise?
The facility that we're most concerned about when it comes to sea level rise is the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, which is on the coast in Louisiana and in Texas. So they have already been subject to hurricanes and flooding, and they have been very proactive in making sure that they're protected for future events. So they have fortified a number of their facilities, and they have also elevated their equipment so it doesn't, it's not subject to flooding. But that is the facility I would say that we're most concerned about with regard to sea level rise.
Okay, the national labs though are high enough that they're not a cause for immediate concern.
We believe they are at this time, but all of our laboratories or sites are all doing vulnerability assessments. Those assessments will be completed by this September. And so they will determine whether or not they feel that they're vulnerable. And also they will be developing action plans that where they're prioritizing their actions. So we will see the results of that. Yeah. And I just want to add, because I haven't had a chance to add this yet, the folks at NOAA do a fantastic job. We had them come in and do some workshops for our teams that are developing these vulnerability assessments. And they provided us with tools and instruction on how to use the tools so that we can really zero in to specific parts of the country and determine the vulnerability of our sites. So thank you to NOAA for that.
Yeah, no, last year I introduced the Restore and Modernize Our National Labs Act, which has a companion piece led by Senator Lujan. And it was recently included as an amendment in the Competes Act and provides significantly more funding for national labs to pursue deferred maintenance generally. And so are you in a position now, if this money actually gets delivered by Congress, to do that deferred maintenance and other critical infrastructure in a way that's consistent with this plan? Or will you need more time to think through the climate resilience aspects of the money that we're hopefully about to deliver to you?
We will want to make sure that we give a lot of thought to spending the money. We want to make sure that we're spending it on the right things. So we would take a look at the plans that are submitted, the prioritized actions, and would use the funding to address the top priorities. So, but we would take care of it. We definitely.
Thank you. My time is up and yield back.
Mr. Byers recognized.
Thank you very much. Who's ever chairing this meeting right now? I really appreciate being part of this. I am glad we're having this conversation about climate resilience. I live right across the river in Alexandria, and it seems to be a hotspot for flooding. And it's not just the river, which continues to rise, but the fact that these 100-year rainstorms that are now happening every summer overwhelm the streams, they overwhelm the stormwater systems. You have houses that are 4 miles from the river whose basements are flooding as they come back up through the drain systems. And I don't even live in Norfolk or Virginia Beach, where you have to check the radio and the TV every morning to figure out how you're going to get to work based on the flooding. With Congressman Brian Master, Republican, we have the National Coastal Security Improvements Act to address exactly this, dedicated funding for coastal resilience. I'm afraid, though, there's not nearly the scale that's needed, but it's a start. Dr. Spinrad, from your NOAA perspective, can you speak to the National Coastal Resilience Fund and how much more demand there is and what the fund can support?
Yeah, thank you, Congressman Byer. The issues you've raised are ones that are central to our investment in coastal resilience. And so obviously the additional resources being provided in the Infrastructure Act that will go to this are going to be critical. Our challenge is going to be basically to improve predictive capability and downscale it, if you will. So it's one thing to say that in the east coast of the U.S. we're going to see rainfall of a certain amount, and therefore we can expect a probability of flooding of X%. It's another thing to be able to get it down to the street level, to the block level, and say this part of Alexandria will flood, this one will not. Working closely with a number of other agencies, especially in Interior, we're trying to develop improved flood forecasts through improved investments in hydrology overall. So the Coastal Resilience Fund that you alluded to will include solicitations specifically for improving the accuracy and the resolution of those forecast products. I've got to say, you brought out a key point, and that is that we tend to think of the flooding issues in terms of these traumatic major tropical cyclones, but what some people call the nuisance flooding or sunny day flooding or king tide flooding is probably an even more pernicious problem in terms of the increased frequency. So we're going to be putting a lot of effort into that aspect of the coastal flooding issue.
And Dr. Spinner, I can tell you it's often the number one local issue for those folks who are at the disadvantage of having to serve their local constituents. Ms. Kolb, I just want to thank you for your leadership at the Department of Energy. And I'm so thrilled that the White House is having its first ever summit on fusion power coming up on March 17th. Because as we think about the alternatives, if we can advance fusion power by 30 years, the difference it will make in terms of carbon is just enormous. And Dr. Carney, you're still with us. We've heard from Senator Administrator Nelson that his number one infrastructure goal is the bridge to Wallops Island. And us Virginians, we love that bridge, or love the new bridge. But I'm worried that virtually all of our launch facilities border water for good reasons. And so we're worried about beach erosion and the ability to maintain launch capabilities at Wallops and Canaveral and other places. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes, sir. It is a concern. It's one of our top concerns, and obviously access to the Wallops flight facility on the bridge is a big piece of our infrastructure, and we plan on getting that done. So yeah, I mean, again, that access to space is one of our critical pieces. It's our number one piece of our climate action plan, is to maintain access to space, and obviously Kennedy Space Center and Wallops Flight Facility are two of our primary access points. And so we will do everything we can in our capability to protect those zones. We've done a shoreline restoration program down at Kennedy Space Center to actually to build the shoreline up to protect those launch facilities, as well as grow grass there and things like that we hope will protect erosion in the future as it comes in, because we do expect to have more coastal storms and more impacts. So it is number one on our list in terms of, making sure that launch availability is there.
Great. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Now yield back.
Are there any other members seeking to ask questions? Okay. Before we bring the hearing to a close, I want to thank our witnesses for testifying before the committee today. The record will remain open for 2 weeks for additional statements from members and for any other question the committee may ask of the witnesses. The witnesses are excused and the hearing is now adjourned.